Hello, everyone. I hope that you are all doing well. Clearly, I'm working from home this morning, as you can see my ukulele in the background. But I did want to touch base and do some recap of our previous module on pre-assessment and then provide a brief introduction to our next module on flexible grouping. So in terms of pre-assessment, first off, I just want to say that you guys have done a wonderful job in terms of your assignments and your discussion board posts. Particularly the discussion board posts have challenged me in a different way so far in this class. You guys have such a variety of experience and lots of it. So several of you have advanced degrees in other related fields. Several of you have been both administrators and teachers. So I really enjoy the questions that you are asking each other, and it's challenged me as well in a very positive manner. So I just want to thank you for that. And kind of related to that quick thank you is a request. We do have quite a variety of students in here in terms of the content that we teach. So if at any point you feel like the materials are not meeting your needs and not related to your content in the way that you wish they were, please do not hesitate to contact me, and I can work on that and or provide some additional resources for you to look into. So I just like to make sure that's out in the open in case there's anything I can do to make the experience better. But going back to pre-assessment, you guys did a really good job digging into why pre-assessment is important. I appreciated your honesty in that. So I like to call out a couple of people to give you guys the credit and not me. So Michelle started her post by saying that pre-assessment is not equal to more work. And I'm so glad you said that, because that's what most educators, including myself at times, think about pre-assessment. It's, oh gosh, I've got to do this again. It's like giving another test. Do I even have time? And so I think she did a good job just kind of saying what we were thinking, but also unpacking the reasons why pre-assessment really is necessary. As Brad said in his post, without pre-assessment, we are really assuming that we know what our students understand. And no matter how long we've been teaching, no matter how many degrees we have, we can't read our students' minds and they can't read ours. So we really do have to assess in order to understand where our students are. That being said, it does not have to be an incredibly formal assessment. Several of you mentioned that the option for the toughest 5 or the hardest 5 questions, that is one method in terms of pre-assessment. I appreciated Amy discussing using pre-assessment beyond just readiness. So oftentimes we just want to know what our students know about the content, and we fail to ask them, what are you interested in, and how do you prefer to learn that material, which is, in my opinion, equally, if not more important than readiness. I appreciated James saying that pre-assessment is not all about looking for gaps. We tend to think of even assessment in terms of looking for gaps too. That's a concept I discuss a lot in my assessment course with my undergrads. They tend to think of assessment as, what did I do wrong as the student? And I try to shift their mindset to think of assessment as, what can I as the teacher improve on? So by giving a pre-assessment, we're not looking necessarily for where our students went wrong. More importantly, we're looking for what are their strengths, how can we capitalize on those strengths, and how can we most effectively use those strengths in the classroom. I do want to point out, Cheryl made a great point about the fact that some students who may be gifted in the science class, which is of course the content for that discussion board post, may not be gifted writers, so we need to be careful in the way we are pre-assessing. That is kind of related to this toughest or hardest 5 question technique. I am very concerned about validity of pre-assessments, that they're actually measuring what we think they are. If we give an all essay pretest in a science classroom, we're really measuring their language ability oftentimes more than their actual science ability. So we want to be careful with that. In my opinion, the same thing with the hardest 5. If we're giving 5 questions, that's not necessarily the best opportunity for students to demonstrate what they know. So I would want to see a couple more questions than that. But I just appreciated Cheryl or Sherelle, correct me if I'm wrong, mentioning that, because we do need to be very careful as we are selecting these pre-assessments that we'll use. Heather did a good job saying that really to convince the other teachers to use pre-assessment, we should be talking about the connection between our assessment results and differentiation decisions. Even giving a universal pretest so that all the teachers can be looking for similar patterns and can be working together. But the crux of pre-assessment is it forms the foundation for differentiation to begin. So without pre-assessment, we're really differentiating based on an assumption. So I'm assuming that these students, well, they came in with the gifted label, so therefore they're always gifted, and they're always gifted in my content that I think is most important. Well, that's a problem, right? So we know from 594, if you haven't taken that yet, giftedness varies. So we can't assume that just having the label of the honor student or label of the gifted student means that they're going to be ready in all content areas. Also, we may assume they don't know something when they really do. So we're not just looking again for those gaps. We also may be surprised that they already know something that we were planning to teach. So you can't think about differentiating until you first think about pre-assessment. Because if you do not do some form of pretest, you are literally differentiating based on an assumption. That is just the most important thing for you to grasp right now as we come into this next module, which starts to really look on how do we do these instructional grouping formats? What does this really look like in the classroom? You can't start asking yourself that if you don't first know the students based on a valid and reliable pretest. I did appreciate several of you talking about some of the strategies that you use in your class. Is it practical to give a long, perfectly valid, reliable pretest every time? No. I'm the first to say that a lot of things in gifted ed in the literature are just really idealistic, and it bothers me. So no, that's not practical. But it is practical to give an open-ended assessment, and you can gauge readiness. It is practical to give a survey based on interests and based on learning preferences. It is practical to do a KWL or to do a graffiti wall, as one of you mentioned. So don't think that pre-assessment has to be formal. So pre-assessment comes first, and then we are really basing our differentiation decisions based on that. So that brings us into this coming week, in which we will focus on instructional grouping. Instructional grouping, particularly with flexible grouping, it's kind of like a dance in teaching. It's kind of complicated, but once you get the hang of it, you don't have to think about it. So I know that differentiation is intimidating, and it definitely is for me as well. So I want us to think not only in our idealistic classrooms, but more practically, like day one, we get in and we're starting to teach in the fall. What is that one simple thing that we could potentially do? So in terms of this coming week, you have 2 assignments. So your first is the discussion board posts. And as always, that initial post will be due on Saturday at noon. And then your responses to at least 2 of your classmates' posts will be due on Sunday evening. In addition to that, you also have what's called the instructional grouping assignment. And I'll talk a little bit more in a moment, but I do want to emphasize that you have the option of working in groups for that assignment. You don't have to, because I know that can be stressful in terms of an online setting. But I did set up a discussion board for you guys to form groups if you wish, and I would highly encourage you to do that. But before we go deeper into that, let's talk about the case study for this week. So this one is a little complicated, You'll just need to read it a couple of times because there's a lot of characters in it because it's based on a real situation. So basically the situation here is a group of teachers are working to make instructional grouping decisions based on a pretest. So what's happening is they have all of the results from a pretest in a math unit, and they are attempting to sort out the students in terms of who should go where, and so we can most effectively teach everyone. One of the teachers mentions, well, maybe we should also look at their ability tests, which would be more of a standardized test that the students would have taken. And the crux of the issue is, according to the ability tests, they should sort the students in one way, but according to the test based on the curriculum, the pretest that they wrote, they should sort the students in another way. So they're having this interesting debacle, and that's really the whole story behind this case study is how should these teachers decide, number one, which data should they use in terms of differentiating for readiness, or maybe both, and number two, which grouping strategy should they use? So are they thinking homogeneous grouping or heterogeneous grouping or cluster grouping? If this sounds Greek, it's all in your reading. So it's an interesting case study, mainly because it's real. So you're kind of seeing, oh my gosh, this is what it looks like. So in terms of your case study discussion post, it's pretty general. And I want you to be sure that you read the post carefully. Within the case study, there's another question listed, and I've asked you to ignore that. The discussion post is for you to reflect on why instructional grouping is important in this case study. So there are some very clear reasons why these teachers really need to think about instructional grouping. There's clear evidence that it will not be good practice for them to teach the whole class at one time. So I want you to dig into why is instructional grouping so important for these gifted and talented students within that case study, and use your library materials as usual to support your answer. So that's your discussion board post. The assignment, the instructional grouping assignment, is based on this case study as well. So within that assignment, you're digging deeper into the case study, basically. And from there, you're investigating, well, which results do I use in order to inform my differentiation? It's your first question. And second, you're investigating which grouping format would be best for these students. Now, within this assignment, you have the option to either work independently or to work as a group. I, in the past, required this as a group project, but I know that it's a very crazy time of year, and some of you, it just won't work in terms of getting everything together, so I did want to be sensitive to that. If possible, I would encourage you to work with one other, maybe two other individuals, mainly because it's a good assignment to kind of bounce ideas off of each other. If you wish to do that, I set up a discussion board so you guys can form groups on your own. So you're looking into those two specific questions, which is really just taking that case study further. And if you look at the rubric, again, what I'm looking for is your clear response to those two questions based on which data should I use for differentiation in terms of readiness, and which grouping format should I look for. The other thing your rubric is looking for is, of course, analysis that is informed by your library materials, as well as professional writing and articulation. So I know that this video was a little bit of a fire hose. I do find flexible grouping to be complicated at first, but the more you start reading about it, then like dancing, I said, it just starts to make sense. So one thing I will encourage you with, because through reading your discussion board posts, and just from my own personal experience, differentiation is super intimidating. And one of the most helpful things that I have ever heard in terms of differentiation is not to think of it as a strategy, but to think of differentiation as a mindset. So if we think about it as a strategy, we're always going to fail because there is no way that within each class we are differentiating process, product, content, and thinking about interest, readiness, and learner preference. It's not going to happen. So if you think about it as a strategy and a checklist, you will always be overwhelmed. However, if you think about your teaching through the concept and the framework of differentiation, everything kind of shifts. So you start to think, oh, I know these certain students are interested in that particular content. When I get to this unit, I'm going to really tap into that interest and I'm going to work with them to get the other students interested. And I've noticed that these two students like to work together, and maybe in a couple of weeks I'll give them the opportunity to do that. Or I've noticed that my students are really tired of doing papers, and so maybe next week I'll think about differentiating in terms of my product or even my process. Or I've noticed that some of my students have struggled with this one content. Let's give them some differentiation for readiness so some can review, but I've got some who are really doing a lot better and they need to be further challenged. What that mindset does, guys, is it takes you away from your 50-minute time period in which, who knows how long it takes for you to get the students to pay attention and to put their phones away, and maybe there's a pep rally. You can't differentiate perfectly in 50 minutes. So you have to think about it as a mindset. I'm constantly thinking content, product, process, interest, readiness, preference. And I'm thinking about it long term because it's a framework, it's an idea, it's a concept. It's not a checklist of strategies. That's impossible. So hopefully that helps. As always, you guys are welcome to contact me if you have any questions or any concerns. I did post an update in terms of how to cite some of your internal citations. So if you have questions on that, please do let me know. Otherwise, I hope that you have a wonderful week, and I look forward to keeping in touch.